the names of the important individuals in front of you right now, that's a pretty cool team that's come together to really put this series together for you guys. And so Mr. Rick Smith is going to be your lead speaker today on dairy cattle. He's out of Oliver County. He's an extension agent for agricultural and natural resources out there. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up of this series, this is actually the 7th of our series, and we have one more to go. Next Monday is going to be our last of this series for rabbits. It's been a pretty cool virtual series that's come together with all this COVID interesting season we've been in. So we've taken on this pretty neat opportunity to share some valuable tips and tricks with you guys. So we're going to come over and groom over some training and grooming tips. We're going to talk about showmanship performance, so like your actual position and how you should maneuver through some of the arena steps. We're going to show a video tonight that North Dakota put on from our North Dakota State Fair to give you some more tips on moving through the arena with your animal. We're going to end with talking about you as an exhibitor and your important role to our industry and as a mentor, and then we'll talk about some questions and answers. And with that, I think we're going to get rocking and rolling. And so I'm going to let Mr. Rick Smith take it over from here.
Well, thanks, Leanne. It's truly a pleasure to get to visit about dairy showmanship. And this is actually the species that kind of got the ball rolling a little bit about a year and a half ago. I had an opportunity to listen to an individual from Quebec, Canada, that came to World Dairy Expo and kind of indicated that there is one way to show dairy cattle, and that's universal around the world. And so it kind of started the ball rolling, and so we brought that concept back to North Dakota, and we put together a team of our state experts in multiple species, and we decided to do a kind of just put together some videos, and then we're putting together a showmanship guide that we're going to have finished up here later on this year as well. And if you want a written version of the showmanship in different species, including poultry and rabbits, I think this is going to be a great series for us. Dairy's kind of got a soft spot in my heart. I think that part of it is I've encouraged my kids that if there's one opportunity to go to a national contest, I think dairy is the one that puts on the best show. And part of it, and actually a big part of it, is the people that represent the dairy industry. They take so much pride in their animals, and they're so willing to share their knowledge. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to be a successful dairy exhibitor. We're going to talk about how you keep those animals in the right condition. We're going to talk about the nutrition that it takes to get those animals looking their best. We're going to talk a little bit about how you prepare those animals, whether it's the fit job that goes along with preparing those animals, maybe some equipment that is needed, and some of it that might just be making the job a little bit easier. We're also going to talk about your appearance as an exhibitor. And I think that being in dairy showmanship, you as an exhibitor make a huge difference in the way that the physical appearance in the show ring really looks. We're going to show a video that we recorded at the North Dakota State Fair about some things that individuals are doing right, maybe some things they can work on. We're going to talk about your physical appearance in the show ring, and like Leanne had mentioned, is that we do want to give you the opportunity to ask questions as we go through this Zoom webinar, and as well as at the end of the class tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We're going to talk a little bit about nutrition. And again, nutrition is something that starts relatively early in your project. Anytime you make decisions about the feeding of your animal, it's going to take some time before those nutritional changes are actually going to truly maximize their effect on your animal. So basically start with a ration. Know what the age of your animal is, and the weight and the condition of your animal. One of the things that we see in the dairy industry is that we get our dairy calves a little bit too fleshy, or too much condition on them. And so it's probably as hard to take condition off as it is to put condition on. And so one of the things that we want is we want to also talk about, what do you want that animal to look like? We want a really good growth curve, and especially in these heifers and the calves, we want to see them fairly large frame and have a really good growth curve. We want to see some elevation up through their front end, and really the way that we can do that is, first is genetics, to give them the genetic potential to grow. And then the next thing is what you're feeding them to kind of exemplify how we want those animals to look. Just a kind of couple of brief notes is that, know what hay does to an animal. Basically, grass hay, long stem grass hay, will give the animal a deeper rib shape and a deeper bodied look to it, where alfalfa will get them more tucked up in their gut. It might give them really more energy as far as for protein and some of the nutrients, but it does affect the way that the animals will grow. We also want to make sure that you look at that animal. If you have a animal that's got a lot of extra condition on, you might move to more grass hay. If it's an animal that's needing more protein in the diet because it's a little harder doing, you might switch to more alfalfa hay. Something to keep in mind is that we don't like to see a lot of changes in the feed ration in itself. Usually we're going to feed TMRs, or total mixed rations, to these animals. And it might include silage or chopped hay, along with mineral packs and whatever else might be recommended by your nutritionist to balance your animal's diets. Also know what you have as far as feed resources at your location where your animals are at. Make sure that it tastes good, that the feed doesn't get sour, and where they will go off feed, that's also important as well. Making changes to their physical appearance, as we mentioned, does take some time, and you should allow probably 2 months on a particular ration to really maximize the changes within that body appearance. Always want to make sure that you practice good biosecurity and avoid borrowing other people's equipment. One of the things about dairy is that we consider that to be the species that we really focus on purity and cleanliness. And so we don't want to be moving bacterias from one farm to the next any more than absolutely necessary. Provide your dairy animal with plenty of clean, fresh water and cool water. They will drink more water if the water is cool, and especially in hot days, you're going to want to make sure they have water at all times. So selecting your animal. How many dairy breeds are there? Who can throw it out there? Actually, there's 7 that are recognized at World Dairy Expo and in the United States. And so what you want to do, and we've seen some really neat ideas or neat people on the call here of like in the Jerseys and the Guernseys, and a good representation of those breeds. You also want to consider the age of the animal that you would like to show for that year. And also maybe that correlates a little bit with your age as well. Pick something that you can handle that's appropriate for your size. Some people believe that, the big animals are more competitive because they're more seen in a show ring. That's not really the case. It's really about finding that animal that's the right fit for you. If you're a smaller person, maybe you show a little bit smaller calf, and so you want that to correlate fairly evenly. Some other things that you want to look at is birth dates. Now, within the dairy species itself is that we have multiple age groups of dairy classes. And so finding an animal that is at the upper end of that birth date range will really help you in being more competitive. Dairy calves grow very rapidly. And so even if it's a 3-month age spread, when the animals might only be 6 months of age, there's a lot of growth difference between one that's right under the 9 months and one that is right at the 6 months. There's a big difference there. So look at the ages of the animal, and you want to know that because you're going to want to know what class they're going to be participating in for probably up to 2 years or maybe even 3 years or longer if you're able to show them as as cows. The ideal heifer should be one that's growing well. Look through and make sure that for its date of age that it's right at the top end of that growth curve. Select animals that have correct conformation and physical characteristics. Basically, we can change a good calf into a great calf if it has the right conformation, and we can do that through nutrition. But if you have something that's got structural problems, those are something that you just can't feed out. In many cases, you can't show those faults out to make that animal extremely competitive. So again, look for something that's long-bodied, relatively large-framed, has some body and some rib shape to it, and that also that we've got a correct and desirable set to the feet and legs. Now, when selecting your project, many states do not allow exhibiting bull calves. While some do, you want to check your state's rules on that. Some states also offer the opportunity to show the steers. They're going to classify it as a dairy beef division. And then also, the majority or the vast majority of dairy animals that are exhibited are heifers and cows. And they break those down into spring, summer, fall calves and winter calves, as well as spring, summer, fall, winter yearlings. And then they will also break down the cow divisions on whether or not they're in lactation. And then there's also dry cow classes. So another one of the things that you want to look at your rule book is to determine whether or not you have a registered animal. Some shows will only allow registered animals to participate, but then there are grade animals as well. Look at your rule book and determine where your animal is going to best compete or be eligible to exhibit. Within the dairy industry, we do see a lot of youth that have the ability to lease programs. I know in North Dakota, as well as across the United States, there's not many people that are milking cows anymore, but there's still a huge desire for people that like to show dairy animals, mainly because they're a fairly easy animal to house. They're an easy animal to train in relativity to some other animals. And so lease options are a great option if your state allows you to do so. Make sure that you have your lease agreements finalized before your ownership and possession deadlines, and then also fill out the paperwork and turn that into your local extension office if they're the ones that are managing the papers. Know whether you or not you need to transfer the animal's name into your own to be able to exhibit, or if your state allows you to show under a different owner's name. Also, when you select your calf, know what the vaccination programs are. They do require C and D shots, and basically 7 ways probably. Again, every state's going to be somewhat different as what concerns they have with their livestock, but know their vaccination protocols that are in place. Hoof trimming is kind of important in some calves and cows. This is one of those things that we encourage you to visit with a veterinarian to handle the foot care of your livestock. Also, many dairy animals, in fact, most breeds do not allow animals to be exhibited with horns. Some breeds may do that. Again, check your local rules. Another thing on the veterinarian side of it is that animals, or dairy animals, like many other species, are susceptible to ringworm, warts, pink eye, and so you want to maintain a healthy calf. And if you do start to observe some of those problems with your animal, make sure that you address them very soon, so by showtime we can have any contagious infections cleaned up and you don't have an issue of whether you may not be able to exhibit that animal. We'll talk a little bit about equipment. There's really not a lot that you need to have with dairy cattle unless you get into milking cows, that type of thing. But realistically, you need to start with a good polypropylene halter. And again, as indicated up here in the upper left, you want a polypropylene halter to train your calves, to tie your calves or cows into their stalls. And make sure that it's about the right length of nose piece so it fits the size of animal that you're working with. Again, we use this type of a halter in case that an animal does get in an awkward position, and we also want you to learn how to tie a slip knot so you can release that animal if need be without too much difficulty. Also, you're going to want a show halter like the one with the chain here on the upper right. Kind of some other things that are important to have is a clippers, whether you have an electric one or a cordless one. We think that there's a need basically to get your animals clipped, and depending upon how serious you are about the project, we can determine about how many different guards you might have or different types of clippers. There's one piece of equipment in here that I think is kind of important to get, and that's that pink handled brush right there in the middle. This is a top line brush, and it really makes fitting top lines much easier. We're going to talk a little bit about fitting top lines as we go along, and having the right blower is going to help with that as well. We don't use a lot of adhesives in the dairy industry, but maybe something like an olive oil or vegetable oil might be something to soften the hides of the animals, especially if they're going to get dry skin from excessive washing, that type of thing. Obviously, you're going to want a soft bristled brush like the one in your lower right corner, and that's to get the dust and dirt out of the animal. Okay, so preparing your animal. I think starting off with that nylon halter, probably at least 3 months prior to your first show, tie the animal up, get to be friends. I really think that having that bonding experience makes the whole show season much more pleasant. As soon as that animal starts to trust you, then you can do a whole lot more with it. One thing I always tell people with whether it's beef or sheep or whatever it might be, is that tie it up and don't think you're going to walk that animal the first maybe 4 or 5 times that you tie it up. Like I said, build that experience, that positive relationship between you and the animal. And then when you take it out, it's much more cooperative and less likely to take you for a ride the first time or two. Also, starting with younger calves can make it a whole lot easier to manage those animals when you're starting that training process. Leading the calf may be a challenge at first, but it really comes down to your behavior. Now, another thing that kind of goes along with dairy is they're a more docile animal in general. And if you remain calm and relaxed, it kind of reflects upon that animal and the way that they're going to work with you pretty much throughout your show season. So stay calm and show on is kind of a theme that we've had in showing animals, and especially in this dairy industry. So let's talk a little bit about picking the right animal. What does dairy really mean? It's a very common term when you get into the judging events, or you listen to dairy judges talk about she's more dairy. What does that mean? Basically means that she's got a clean, long neck, that her ribs are open and clean. You want to be able to see the ribs of an animal in any dairy animal. You want to see a flat incurving thigh that's basically right where in this cow where the udder is at. That thigh should be free of fat. And if it looks more like a beef animal and a lot of muscle back there, you might have a little bit of too much condition on, or you might have picked an animal that just is too easy doing. And that's an indication of how well they're going to milk too, is how clean they are, how dairy they are. Look down their spine, the top of the animal. You want that to be very prominent, which means that, again, you see the vertebrae up on her top line or her back. You want to see her hooks and pins kind of stick out and be really wide and very prominent there as well. Leanne marked out the chine bone. The chine bone is an indication of right where the animal should be the tallest if we take away that head and neck. You want her to be taller at her chine bone than she is at her hooks and pins or anywhere along her top line. This is an animal that kind of, as we say in other species, she runs uphill, and she does show more elegance and strength if we have that high chine bone. Dairy strength is another thing that we really want to focus on. This means that she's got enough power up front. She's got stands on a good foundation. She's stands down with her feet perpendicular to the ground, and she just looks like she's got some stability to her front end. We don't want to see them frail or narrow. That's something that we just can't feed into an animal, is to give them more width and through her chest. And so you want to look at that part of the animal when you're selecting them. In the heifers itself, or more so than the cows, frame is important. We want them to be tall fronted and long bodied. However, we also want to see that the animal has rib. And spring of rib is basically that outward expression of their center body. And we want to see those ribs as wide apart as we possibly can get them. Also, we want depth of rib. So basically from the middle of her back to the bottom of her belly, we want to see that as deep as we possibly can. Also, we want to see good feet and legs, that they don't have too much set to their legs where they angle in too much, or if they get really post-legged. This is actually the #1 reason why dairy cattle are exited from the dairy world, is because of feet and legs. It's not because of udders breaking down or mastitis or anything like that. It's because the animals actually live on concrete most of their life, and they need strong feet and legs to make a long, healthy, functioning life within the dairy industry. In this dairy animal that we're seeing here, is that she's got a lot of really good things about her. She's level in her top. You can see that she's got adequate rib shape and dimension to her. And you can also look at a dairy cow in that 40% of the way they place dairy cows is on their mammary. You can see the way she set this heifer or this cow up. You can see the fore udder attachment as well as the rear udder. You want to see some bloom, capacity, and some youthfulness to that mammary system. And that also kind of helps secure a longer term in the parlor or milking barn. Now, preparing your animal. We just mentioned that dairy animals have a tendency to stay on concrete a lot of their life, whether they're in dry lots or in the barn. Developing a routine, get your animals out and exercise them. This actually helps reduce stress of your animal, and basically you can build that bond with your animal. It also is important to keep your animal healthy is to get them out and walk them. You also want to develop the routine from the standpoint of feeding them at the same time every day. This is why I have such a high regard for dairy people. They don't get vacations. They're going to milk cows 365 days a year. And those animals are, basically they become part of your family. Build the routine, you milk them at the same time, you feed them at the same time, and that just helps animals from going off feed as well. When you get into showing dairy cattle, one of the things they will tell you is that you need to identify the faults of your animal and find every way that you possibly can to show those faults out. If you have an animal that's maybe a bit weak-loined, or maybe she's one that kind of runs downhill a little bit where she's short-fronted, you want to find ways that you can show that out. We're going to talk about this more as we get into showing dairy cattle, but you as the exhibitor have a responsibility to keep the head up, set the feet, make sure the loin is straight, and then you find the judge. Look at this exhibitor here. Head is up, that top line is just as flat as can be, and those feet are set the way he would like them to be for the judge to view. We'll talk more about that in our next couple of slides. Appearance. Appearance of you as an exhibitor is important, but just as importantly is the appearance of your animal. Dairy is known for being like the purity and the cleanest species that you can ever imagine. And that comes from the way that we prepare our animals. We rinse them relatively often. By doing that extra rinsing and conditioning of the hair, It makes the hair more manageable. We also want to make sure that you use a mild soap, not necessarily every day, but soaps like an Orvis takes out more of the grease. And this really helps when it comes to fitting top lines, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. However, if you use soap too much, it can dry the skin out, and it can really make that really soft, pliable hide not look so good. We can use conditioners like olive oil or vegetable oil to wipe the animal down to recondition those hides and to keep that skin looking healthy. We talked a little bit about the hoof trimming and some of those things, and we want you to make sure that if you are going to trim hooves, if there's a necessity to do that, basically contact your veterinarian to do the hoof trimming, and that should be done at least 3 weeks prior to your exhibition, as sometimes they will go lame and get very soft on their feet if there's some foot issues there. Notice in the appearance, we're going to talk about these 4 exhibitors showing the brown Swiss cattle up on top. Their pants are white. Their shirts are, basically uniform. They fit what their show wants, and those animals are clean. There's no dirt spots or, basically any stains on the knees or any parts of those animals. That is really important to being a fantastic dairy exhibitor. The top lines. In fact, we were talking earlier today with one of the gals on our team, is that the vast majority of your time prepping your animal is going to be to get the top line right, the way you want it. You basically are going to leave about 1 inch on each side of the spine, and you're going to leave that hair long, and you're going to pull that hair up, and then you can clip it so that top line looks like it's razor sharp. Basically, you need to start working with this top line by conditioning the hair and getting it soft and manageable. One of the tricks that I've heard from someone who exhibits at World Dairy Expo is here they're using a blower that provides some heat. And what it will do is it's going to make that hair more manageable. And so you want to get that hair kind of coming up at a point, and that heat will actually help that hair stay there. However, too much heat can cause drying of the skin, as well as kind of do some damage to the hair as well. So the top lines are important. One thing that I do see a little bit more is that you don't want to leave too wide of a strip down their top. I guess about 1 inch on each side of the spine is about all that you really need to leave on. And then also work that top line so you're not doing a lot of clipping right outside of that 1 inch mark, just so you don't have a lot of clipper marks come showtime. We talked about that top line brush, and it's kind of an indication of how that can work to help condition that top line and make it more manageable. Clipping out the tail and the rump and the legs. Basically, you're going to take all of the hair off of the animal except for the top line. And then if you can go up from the switch, that long hair on the tail, maybe about 3 or 4 inches above that switch is where you're going to take all the hair off from there on up. We also want to make sure that you clip the udders. If your cows if they're in milk, we want the udders to be clipped very short. And it does start to show or demonstrate the elasticity and pliability to the mammary system. And it also exemplifies the mammary glands, the venation, as well as just gives that udder a more milky appearance. We also want to make sure that anytime you're doing any clipping or working down low on these animals is that you're careful. Working with those legs, sometimes the cows or heifers are not overly excited to have you playing with their legs. And so you need to be careful. But we wouldn't, encourage you to try to get as much hair off those legs as possible, basically from the hoof line on up to the belly. Many people are leaving hair on the bellies of these dairy animals as well, as it does start to exhibit more depth of body, more depth of rib to these animals too. And so if that's a fault of your animal, you can leave more hair on the underlines of these animals to give them more of that depth appearance when they enter the show ring.
And Rick, I'm just curious because you have it written there. Are docked tails allowed?
Well, absolutely. That's a very good question. I'm sorry I missed that question. Now, as growing up on a dairy farm, more in a parlor system, you know, people kind of get that tail sloshed around and you kind of get your nose wiped with a dirty tail. And many of those farmers or dairy farmers are going to cut the tails off. It should show no advantage or disadvantage to you as an exhibitor. I would say if your show cattle are, going to be going to a lot of shows, it might look better to leave that tail on. However, it's not going to affect how you place the animal, or at least it shouldn't. That the tail doesn't produce milk and it doesn't really add a whole lot. I know it looks prettier, but really, leave them long if you want, but no disadvantage to those that do dock.
Thank you for answering that.
Okay, so going on and clipping the neck and head. Now this is a little bit more of a sensitive area to cattle, and sometimes they don't like it, especially the first time or two. So one of the things we really like to do is to use probably more of a battery charged clipper. They seem to be a little bit quieter and not putting that buzzing sound across their ears and their eyes so much. But we do want to make sure that we clip out that head, the ears, the poll, leave the eyelashes on, but you do trim the hair off of the muzzle and kind of clean that up really neat. So basically all the hair's coming off in front of the animal except maybe the eyelashes. We want to make sure that we don't take those off. We want to do this because it's going to give the animal a cleaner throat, cleaner neck, and a more fresh look to them. Again, don't use too big of clippers up front. Be calm. Again, those animals can sense if you're a little bit agitated or if things aren't going right. So sometimes putting them in a clipping chute can help you maybe extend their neck and back them up a little bit so there's spots that you can reach that might be a little bit more difficult than if you were to do them out in the open. One of the things we wanted to emphasize about dairy showmanship is this young lady here does a very nice job of positioning that halter so it fits appropriately. And I want you to take a quick look at the ring on the cow's right side. This is the way that you attach the chain to a chain halter with that little snap on going to the outside. This is going to reduce the potential for any rubbing against that face of the animal and causing some irritation and some unnecessary sores. Again, also look that this one is right halfway between the eyes and the muzzle, where that nose piece comes across the face of that animal. She does a very nice job of fitting that for show, and it really helps the animal behave more calm and collectedly as well when we get into the show ring. Now let's talk a little bit about how you hold the halter as well. If we want to take a look down to this bottom left picture, this is an indication of how you position your hands within inside of a halter. Basically, you're going to not put your fingers through the ring, but right below the ring, and you're going to fold that chain in half. Then if we can go up to the picture of the red and white just above her, or above that heifer, is that we want to also coil up that lead strap in your left hand. And so basically combine the bottom picture as to how to hold the chain and then put the lead strap coiled up, not raveled, or excuse me, don't wrap it around like in a circle. If you can coil it up like the young individual here on the top picture, that would be great. If we take a look now to the one off to the upper right, is that she's got that, her left hand is doing exactly like she should be doing. The chain's in there, it's coiled up, and she's managing that strap. Now, obviously, we've got some young people on this webinar as well, and having too much leather can be hard to manage. And so maybe you want to cut back that leather a little bit so you only have to fold it maybe once or twice when you're entering the show ring, because small hands have got a lot to fit in there, and so you might want to manage it that way. Also, we're going to talk about throating a dairy animal as well, and this individual with the Jersey heifer is kind of showing that a little bit as well, and we're going to talk more about how to manage that. The young man down here in the with the Holstein, I think you look at the way that halters fit, that's really good. I would say you might want to switch the your dominant hand to your left, but other than that, he's doing a really nice job with that as well. Coil that halter up a little bit, or that lead strap, and you're set to go. And these are just some really important things. There's one thing that we're also going to talk about, positioning of your elbow. This seemed to be kind of a focal point at World Dairy Expo. The one up here with the red and white heifer, notice that his elbow was down. And we actually want to get a little bit more distance away from that head if we can. But don't bring your elbow up and kind of bring it across the face of the animal. Basically, you're taking away the appearance of the animal, and you're kind of causing a bit of a distraction to the judge as well. So keep the elbow down and somewhat tucked into your body, and that also is going to give you the ability to have more lift to keep that head up, because not all animals are wanting to keep their head up without a little encouragement. So tuck that elbow in, shoulder tucked in, and then keep that elbow at a 90 degree. Other than that, keep the halter coiled up neatly as well, and never put your finger in that ring.
Rick, just because I saw it in the chat, why wouldn't you want to put a finger in that ring?
Well, that's how injuries happen. If she pulls a little bit, that actually can trap your finger in there, and you can break a finger by doing that. Now, it's probably not going to be the most comfortable thing to put your hand inside of a chain that can move in and out either, but you can take some tape and wrap that if you got sensitive hands, and you can do that right where your hand's going to be located in that chain. But basically, from a safety standpoint, we don't want your finger in that ring, because it's kind of like almost like in a vice. If that animal pulls and gets you out of position, it will break a finger.
Thank you, Rick.
We talked a little bit previously about throating the animal. Basically, what this is doing is that dairy animals are supposed to have a fresh, clean look to them. So by grabbing a hold of that extra skin right by the jawbone or in front of the throat, you're going to pull that forward, and it's going to take some of that wrinkle out of their throat. And it's going to make them look cleaner, which we term as more dairy out in the show ring. It also gives you something to where to put your right hand is kind of a question mark at times. But you want to make those dairy animals look as feminine as possible. And so you grab a hold of some of that skin, pull forward, and again, it's going to make their throat look a lot cleaner. Practice this at home. Let the animal become accustomed to what you're doing. Then it's not a shock when you get into the show ring. One of the things we looked at here, I think the individual on top, I really like the way they're holding that halter, except I would coil that halter up just a little bit and to take that extra strap so it's not dangling. Much the same with the young lady down below here. I think she's doing a phenomenal job about keeping that head up high, but I would kind of manage that lead strap and chain just a little bit tighter to give her more of that professional show look. Notice that her elbows are tucked in, they're not out, beyond that 90-degree angle. I think she's doing a great job here exhibiting these animals in this particular picture. Okay, leading your animal. Basically always start in a clockwise fashion. This is going to be very common about show rings, is that when you walk into the show ring, you're going to walk forward into the show ring. You're going to walk in a clockwise fashion. This gives the judge the profile view of the animal. A lot of the decisions about showmanship is determined when you first enter the ring. Again, once all of the animals are in the show ring, again, you're walking forward as you enter the show ring. When the last animal is in the show ring, everybody turns and walks backwards. What used to be a common practice in dairy showmanship is we called it cross-stepping, or where you take your right leg and you cross it over your left leg, and you're kind of walking at a 90-degree angle in relationship to the animal. That's not recommended. So it's either walking straight forward or walking straight backward. So again, walk forward into the class, turn and walk backward at a slower pace until the judge decides to place the class. If he indicates to you that you should take your animal and pull into line, this is when you're going to turn and walk forward, pick up the pace a little bit more, and get into line at a relatively quick pace. And then as you start to pull into line, you got that animal almost where you want her. You can turn and face the animal so you're walking backwards, slow her down a little bit, and then you want to stop that animal right in line of where you want it to stop. Do this gracefully. Don't look rushed within the show ring, but you do pick up the pace at that particular time. Some other things to keep in mind about dairy showmanship is we practice a 5 and 5. What this means is that you're going to stay at least 5 feet away from the outer edge of the arena, and also 5 feet behind the animal in front of you. Spacing yourselves out can make your animal being more noticeable in a show ring. And we've seen it many times. If you get an animal too close and all of a sudden the heifer in front of you, I'm going to say, just might be in heat, your heifer wants to jump. She wants to get a little fidgety. Those are things that can kind of take away from the appearance of your animal, and it can kind of make your experience that day just a little bit less than what you were hoping for. So stay back a little bit. Also, when you're pulling into line, you're going to want to keep some space between you and the other animals on either side of you, if at all possible. Keep a couple feet between. Give the judge some room to walk between the lines as well. Practice walking your animal forward and backward. The one thing we want to keep in mind about this whole deal about moving forward or backward is that your left hand never changes. Your left hand is always the one inside of the halter. It's the one that's always your dominant hand to keep the head up high. And your right hand, we'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about what that right hand is needing to do from time to time. What's unique about the dairy show is that it has a different moving pattern than what all other species have. We've put together a diagram here to kind of explain how judges place dairy classes. Let's say you come in and the judge lines you up, you're side by side, and basically what a judge will do is he's going to walk behind that line, and he's going to say, yep, I like this animal that's in 4th position the best, and the one that's in 1st position the second best, the one in 3rd position, we kind of like her 3rd, and then maybe 4th, and so on. The way that you show dairy cattle is that the animal that the judge basically points to first is going to lead out. You start walking in a clockwise fashion, and the animal that he or she is so chosen to be placed second will follow in line. As those animals come around the line, they're more than likely going to line up head to tail or come back in side by side, and then they're going to be in a pretty close order or placing as to what the judge preferred. Judges will almost always place the animals from their favorite to their least favorite. You'll also want to know that judges' routine. They do remain consistent throughout the shows. And also most judges will have the line in a position to where the audience or where the main audience is going to be located, so they can see the rear of the line or the udders of the cows when they are placed in line. Keep in mind that every judge might have a little bit of a different routine, but one thing that's a little bit more consistent with the dairy industry is that we don't move animals in a figure 8. Let's say that we're going to take a look at the diagram, and 3 goes, he decided that 3 should actually be first. He's not going to have 3 lead forward and come back through that keyhole or the place that they exited from because what happens with dairy animals is we do not want to turn dairy animals on short corners. Basically, their legs are long, they're a little bit awkward anyways, and so we don't want to give a bad view of that particular animal. By doing so, it can really wreck the appearance of those feet and legs, and it might actually cause the judge to say, well, maybe she's not as good off her feet and legs as I wanted. And so you never do that in a dairy show. If you do have to move to a different position in line, you can actually push the animal back through the line and then lead to the new position, or you can lead out and then come around the end of a line and come back into the desired position. But dairy is different than other species from moving in line or placing animals within a class. Now, again, we talked about once they pull into line. What's important about dairy showmanship? In the heifer divisions is that the outside animals of a line are going to set their animals up in the correct position. With heifers, the show side, the rear leg on the show side is going to be placed about maybe 4 or 6 inches behind the leg that is on the non-show side. So in this particular class, the animal off to your left is going to be animal number 1 in the line. She needs to set those feet up so that hind left leg is behind the hind right leg. What's even more important than that is that we don't get those animals overextended. We want those legs to be comfortable underneath of the animal. By stretching those legs out or placing them further back actually causes more structure concerns to the animal, as she might get weak in her loin, or she might have a lot of other things that go bad. Also, it can make her look post-legged as well. So comfortable underneath of the animal is important. Again, if we take a look at the right side of your screen, that animal, we should have those rear feet set the other direction, where the hind right leg should be behind the hind left leg. Also, we would want her to pull that animal forward a couple of steps and make sure that everybody in line is parallel to the animal that was first to start the line. Like that all makes sense. I also think if you take a look at her rear legs, she probably has those rear legs a little bit too far back to be extremely comfortable. With heifers, all of those other 6 animals in the middle there, they basically can set their calves up to where they're comfortable. They can be offset a little bit, but there is no right or wrong as to whether you're going to have the show side rear leg back a little bit further than the other. And you don't shift legs on heifers as the judge moves from one side of the line to the next. So check your feet all the time. Keep the line even. They've done a pretty nice job here of not crowding. They're using the size of the arena. There might be a couple too many heifers in this ring, just for the size of the ring, but try to apply some adequate spacing between your animal and the other animal so the judge can actually walk between them, if at all possible. Posing your animal. You always want to stay on the left side of your animal. This is similar to the same as beef cattle, or I guess the halter is going to be designed to be used from the left side, and so you're going to go from basically just off to the left side of the muzzle and then stay off to the side. Don't get too far in front of the animal as well. In this particular case, this young lady might be trying to set the feet, and you can do that by pushing back into the shoulder of the animal. You can put your hand or your fist right into that shoulder, but that's kind of like a secondary preference. We like you to do as much of that movement with the halter as possible. Now, notice one of the things that why we put the hand inside of that chain. Now, she's got her hand outside of the chain, and she's actually got much less control to move that animal forward and backward than if she had her hand inside of that chain. By pushing back or tugging a little bit, inside that chain would give her a little bit more control. Now, again, we want to make sure that the top line is set. Okay, so we're going to get into the mantra that we have been taught, and that is feet, loin, judge. Anytime you pull in the line, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to make sure those feet are set in the correct position that you want. Then fix the top line, and only when your animal is looking its best do you start to look for where the judge is at. And again, you can do multiple ways of moving that calf forward and backward, but we do prefer that you do as much of that with the halter as possible. Again, in the heifers, we want the rear leg nearest the judge to be slightly behind the non-show side on heifers, and then on the cows, we want the hind leg nearest the judge to be forward, and so the judge can see both the foreudder and the rear udder attachments. So again, they are different from heifers to cows and how we want to properly set those feet. Here's what we talked a little bit about when we said feet, loin, judge. This young lady does a really nice job of keeping her left hand inside of the chain. She's got the halter coiled up appropriately, and she might be recognizing that her animal's maybe just a little bit high in her loin, or maybe doesn't quite keep her lines very parallel, and so she's fixing that. This is an indication of what you do with that right hand. You can actually reach back and take your fingers and push the top line down, or maybe in another one on the bottom picture here, if she's weak in her loin and she dips in her loin, you can actually grab some of the skin right on her belly. You don't want to make this real obvious to the judge, but you can kind of grab some of that skin and kind of give her a little pinch and say, bring that top line up. You're not quite straight. You actually do all of that work with your right hand. Again, we want those animals to be tall and taller at the chine bone than at the hooks and pins, and we want them to look like they're running uphill, but more importantly is that top line looks like you could draw a plumb line or a string super tight across the top, and every part of her top line would touch that line. So again, feet, loin, and then you worry about where the judge is at after that animal is in the position that you think she looks her best. We talked a little bit about the difference in the way that we set cows' feet and legs in relationship to the heifers. These young ladies do a very nice job of positioning their animals. Again, the front feet are traditionally set square, side by side, keep that head up high, and their rear legs are pretty correct in both of these views. That hind leg closest to the judge should split the fore and rear udder attachment and split that mammary system. And again, you can notice how well she does in emphasizing those points here, this young lady with the cow on your left. The heifer on the right, very similar. It's where the mammary would be, is what you want to show the judge. It also is going to give her an advantage of appearing to be a little bit longer as well. And again, once you have those feet set, fix the loin, and then you want to give some eye contact to the judge. But I also want to emphasize that 50% of your time should be spent focusing on your animal to make sure that she has not gotten herself out of position during that show. And then also, you always want to know if that judge points to you, that you recognize that and you move immediately. If they have to point to you a couple times to get you to move into position, it does take away points from your showmanship score. Congratulations to all of the exhibitors. Usually a judge will come up and they'll congratulate an individual as they win, or maybe they exit the ring. Traditionally, the judge in the dairy show will initiate that, because dairy animals are not going to go over to the judge or pull that animal around to make that extra effort. In other species, it works better, but with dairy, it traditionally is the judge that initiates the congratulations. And also, I really believe that the dairy people are very cordial and they're very courteous and they're sincere in congratulating the other exhibitors. You as an exhibitor need to congratulate whoever is in the show ring, whether they placed first or maybe they didn't have the best day out there. Encourage them to participate again and keep up that competitive spirit, but also recognize that we are here to teach character building as well, and that comes from building relationships with other exhibitors.
All right, thank you, Rick. We're gonna move on to the video and keep those questions coming in the chat box because there's some really good ones coming. We are excited to answer those here shortly.
Welcome to the North Dakota 4-H Dairy Cattle Showmanship Educational Video. This video is designed to assist youth in learning the proper practices to become more competitive when showing dairy cattle. This video is a visual supplement to the North Dakota 4-H Livestock Showmanship Guide, publication number GB092. Dairy cattle showmanship is universal in all parts of the world, so this video is valid no matter where you live. Like other showmanship species, your first impressions are powerful, so begin strong. Give the judge the appearance that you are in the show ring to win. Be confident in your mannerisms while being calm and relaxed. As the exhibitors walk into the show ring, they will be walking in a forward motion until the animals are all in the ring. Enter the ring in a clockwise manner. This will give the judge the best view of the animals. The halter is held in the left hand of the exhibitor at all times. Your left hand is inside the chain of the halter. The lead strap should be relatively short, as the lead strap is coiled up in the left hand as well. The less leather you have in your hand, the more comfortable it will be to hold. The lead strap is coiled, not raveled, to where if the animal would happen to get away, it would not drag the exhibitor. The halter needs to fit the animal. The nose strap should be halfway between the muzzle and the eyes of the animal. The snap on the chain should be to the outside. A proper fitting halter will provide for optimum control of your animal. Your right hand can be used to provide support to your left hand to hold the animal's head high for impressive carriage, as well as remaining the animal's natural look. Once all the animals are in the show ring, the exhibitor will turn and lead backwards at a slower pace. Your hand positions on the halter do not change. The right hand of the exhibitor may grab some flesh in the throat of the animal and slightly pull to aid in cleaning up the throat and neck area to make the animal look more feminine. When the judge asks the exhibitors to pull into line, the exhibitors can walk in a forward manner, pick up the pace, and get to where the judge asks quickly. All other times, except entering and exiting the ring, the exhibitor will walk backwards. Seldom will you ever sidestep. When pulling into line, slow the animals down to get them to stop in a straight line. The first animal that is asked to move into line determines where the line will be. Everyone else follows the lead animal. The exhibitor may use their foot to stop the front left hoof of the animal to get her to stop in place. However, be discreet. The first thing you will do anytime the animals stop, whether it's in line or head to tail, is set the legs. When showing heifers, if you were on the left end of the line, set the hind left leg slightly behind the right. If you were on the right side of the line, set the hind right leg slightly behind the rear left leg, while keeping them comfortable under the animal. The heifers or cows in the middle of the line can set either way, but when in line, the leg positions do not change. Don't set the dairy animal's feet too wide. You are not trying to make them look wide-based like meat animals. If lining up head to tail, set the legs so the show side, hind right leg is slightly behind the hind left leg. When showing cows, they are the opposite. The show side, or the side that the judge is on, that hind leg should be slightly ahead of the leg not on the show side. This gives the judge a better view of both the fore and rear udder. Once in line, the responsibility of the exhibitor is to make sure the animal is looking their best. Set the crops up as well as possible. The loin should be set to be level to give the top line as straight of an appearance as possible. Again, anytime the animal stops, the priority of the exhibitor is feet, loin, judge. Set the feet depending upon if it is a cow or a heifer, where you are in line. Set the loin, make the top line of the animal as straight as possible, and then find where the judge is at. Always keeping an eye on your animal. When showing any animal, the appearance of the animal is the most important responsibility of the exhibitor. Dress code for dairy exhibitors is a white shirt and hard-soled shoes. The color of the pants is up to local management. White pants or dark jeans are acceptable in most shows. The color white is a sign of cleanliness and purity, so white is preferred. Make sure your clothes are clean, in addition to making sure yourself is well groomed. No hat ring, no uncombed hair. Ladies will usually have their hair up in a ponytail or a bun. The animals need to be clipped according to show standards. Animals need to be clean and well managed. Questions are fair game in any showmanship contest. Know when your animal was born. Know her sire and her dam. What did you do to get her ready for the show? The type and quantity of feed being fed, and maybe know her pedigree. Dairy showmanship follows a unique method of placing. Many times judges will place them when they are standing side by side. The animal that is placed first will lead out first. The animal placed second will lead out second. Now the animals are leading in the order in which the judge may place them. Never use a figure 8 pattern to place dairy. Dairy cattle should not make sharp turns. It makes their feet appear awkward and may lose body strength. Judges will place the animals first to last. Judges should place the classes so the spectators can see the rear of the class. Showmanship in dairy is about character building. Your first job is to make the heifer or the cow look as good as possible. We encourage you to follow the guidelines of the show and remember to have fun in your dairy experience.
All right, so thank you guys for watching that. And just to reiterate, always a good thing to make sure you're reading your rule book, because a lot of the shows that you go to certainly might have different rules. So it's always good to make sure you read that rule book.
All right, thanks, Leanne. We're going to talk a little bit about dress code. One of the things with the dairy is that white is a sign of purity and cleanliness. And so some shows still like you to wear white pants. I know it's difficult for many exhibitors to find white pants, but if you can find them and keep them clean, I think you look fantastic in the show ring. One thing that is a little bit more unique to the dairy is that we do like the long white or long sleeve white shirts. If you can, use those. I think also is that if you're going to use white, it's important that we keep those clothes looking white. If you probably aren't going to wear them 2 days in a row because they do have a tendency to get a little bit messy. You know, have a nice clean halter. Make sure that it fits right. I think those are all things that are important. You make sure it's a show halter. Now, some people are in smaller county shows. You know, it might not be the biggest thing in the world if you got your polypropylene halter on, but if you get into, you know, competitive shows, you want to make sure you got a nice show halter on. Also want to make sure that you got a belt and hard-soled shoes as you get into the show ring. Caps in most shows are not allowed, and the way that you groom yourself is important. We don't want to have your hair falling all over your face. You know, so if you know, young ladies, if you want to, you know, put it up in a, you know, a headband or a, you know, a ponytail or something like that, that would definitely be advantageous as well. Also, down here in the bottom right is that what is the reason that we like to show animals? And I really think it's about team building, about educating people about your industry. I think you know, just the relationships that we build are extremely important. Think about what you want people to view your exhibition like. One thing that impresses me, and it's every dairy show that I go to, it's how clean the stalls are. I have never seen a group of people that take so much pride in their projects. They put, you know, maybe 1.5 feet of straw and wood chips down, and there's never any cow patties laying in there. They, you know, these people kind of live with their animals and they keep them clean. And I tell you, that makes an impression to the people that we're trying to explain why we do what we do. And that is that dairy is about cleanliness. We want to sell a high premium product and milk. And I just think that it reflects greatly on the exhibitors as we promote youth projects to all of you on this webinar. And I hope that you take that with a lot of pride in the fact that you are role models for this industry, whether you're, you know, taking a lease project or if you're a full-time, full-fledged dairy farm family. I think that you guys have to realize what type of an impact you have on this industry. Keep your stalls clean, keep your clothes clean, and remember that you are an advocate for the dairy industry. And so now, Leanna's mentioned that you guys have some awesome questions out there, and I'd be willing to take a shot at try to answer or clarify some things. So, Kurt, what have you got?
There, getting things set up on my end. Hopefully you can hear me, Rick.
Yes.
We are going to go way back to the beginning of your presentation here. You had said something about condition or fleshing. What do you mean by condition?
Well, it's actually, I'm going to say the word that you never talk about in dairy judging, and that is fat. And that is basically what we're talking about. You don't want a cow that looks like she's been standing at the feed trough and she's kind of getting ready to, you know, look like a finishing steer. If you can take a look at the crops of the animal, right between the tail head, a thick neck that looks more like it's got a lot of muscle and fat on, that's probably an indication that that animal is maybe carrying a little bit too much condition or fat. And so what normally happens is that cows that get into milk production, they will, if they're really good genetically, they will milk their fat off. And what we mean by that is they're taking more, they're converting more of their intake into milk production than they are to maintaining body condition. And so we want them to basically milk that fat off and to make them look like you can see their ribs and you can see their hooks and pins kind of sticking up, and they've got kind of lean legs when you look behind them. If they look like a beef animal, you're probably feeding them too much or too much of the wrong type of feeds.
Okay. Do all dairy cattle have horns, or are some of them polled?
Most of them do have horns when they're born, and actually I forgot to maybe mention that, but really it's important that we dehorn those animals at a relatively young age. It is actually a lot easier on the animals the younger that they are, whether it's with a dehorning paste or if you have other methods of dehorning, but do it when they're young. It's just a lot easier on the animals. Most of them are born with horns and do require some intervention to take those horns off.
Okay. You got any tips on where I can go buy a good show halter for my
I
cow
don't want
and
to
or calf?
promote any particular business, but maybe like NASCO or Weaver. There's lots of places. Actually, most of the time, your local feed stores, I guess, convenience stores that deal with livestock supplies, most of them do carry those. I know in North Dakota here, like Runnings or one of the farm and fleets, those all traditionally have a pretty good supply of show halters.
Okay. Where do I get that top line brush that you talked about?
I think Premier and NASCO, they usually have those. There's a couple of, I can't think of the name right offhand, but maybe Kurt, you can think of it. But there's a lot of traveling supply companies that go to your fairs and stuff that they traditionally have those.
Sullivan's.
Sullivan's, yep, is one that does a lot of those types of brushes. But good question. I do think, finding a local store that handles your show supplies is more than likely going to have access to those.
Okay. Now we're going to move into getting these animals ready for the fair. So should you clip an unfresh 2-year-old more like a heifer or like a cow?
Well, you're probably, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference. I think the one thing that would be different in there is that you probably would not short clip the mammary system because there's really not supposed to be any emphasis placed on the mammary on an unfreshened animal. And part of it is that, let's say that she is getting relatively close to calving and she's freshening up or, bagging up is the term, even though we never use the word bag in the dairy industry, but you kind of get the idea. That mammary system changes quite dramatically, and it may look a little bit uneven as it starts to fill. And so judges should not place emphasis on that. And so I would not clip the mammary system until she freshens. The rest of it is going to be body clipped anyways. And so the only question that I would have is that if she's maybe late in her gestation and she's got a lot of extra middle already, that's the case that you might actually clip the underline or the lower belly of that animal to not give it any more appearance of having that depth of rib or drop to her rib. And so I think, again, it goes back to what do you think that animal's strengths and weaknesses are? And so it might not be the same answer for I'm going to say an easy doing heifer versus one that you had to push the feed to for her to kind of condition up. Also is that heifers that are ready to freshen, we do allow a little bit more condition on. I don't like using that word, but they aren't going to look as dairy or as sharp right before freshening, and judges will know that. That's one of the reasons why it's really important to know when is your heifer due to calf or your cow due to calf, because that can place some emphasis on whether the judge likes that animal or thinks that she's probably, not in the right condition to be extremely competitive. So knowing that the information is important.
Okay. Next question on clipping too is, do I clip my calves the same as I clip my cows? I'm just going to start showing calves from the cows this year. And this is coming from a parent due to the size of the animal plus the size of my children.
That's a really good question. And I guess I would say, look at the animal. I would say these calves, sometimes they could use a little extra depth, and so leave the hair on the underline of that animal is good. But I would also take note that you don't want to leave that hair long and straggly. You still want to clip it so it looks neat, but you're probably going to leave a half inch, maybe an inch on that underline of the calf. Try to get it to blend in. On cows, you're more apt to just take everything off of the underline. So there would more than likely could be some differences in the way that we clip a heifer versus a cow.
Okay. You talked about throating. Is that a universal practice? When I was younger, I was taught not to touch the neck during the show.
It's one of those things that I would say if you have an animal that's got a little extra leather, and this is kind of more of a beef term, but if they got a little extra throat, a little extra skin, they maybe a little loose in their brisket and their dewlap or whatever, your goal is to try to show the faults of that animal out. And so if you have a really fresh, very dairy animal that doesn't have that fault, you don't need to try to fix anything. I still am a believer that a great exhibitor is one who can identify the faults and can do the best job they can to show those faults out of that animal. And so it helps you in showmanship to recognize those faults. Is it universal? I would say, I see it a lot, but I'm not going to say it's a requirement. To me, and I guess I'm going to go back to a lot of the discussions in North Dakota. Well, do you walk frontward or do you walk backwards? And they keep changing the rules. And my answer to that is that, the judge will know if you are a competitive show person as you walk into the ring, and walking frontward or backward at exactly the right time probably isn't going to be the thing that determines whether you win or don't win that class. Be alert. The one thing that I've seen in dairy is that it's hard to hold an animal's head up high. And it's really hard to hold an animal's head up high if that show is taking a half an hour. And so if you start to slouch and all of a sudden you look like you wish you were somewhere else, those are the things that probably affect showmanship more so than if you're grabbing the throat or not.
Okay. An individual asked about how do I move those feet, get those hind legs to move for me? Any tips there?
Anything I would say along that is use that halter. And if you can do, the more you can do with that halter, the more successful you're going to be. If you want to push into that front shoulder, that's kind of a secondary note. And so again, properly holding that halter right is going to help you. And then if you can't quite do it with just by pushing back on the head, then you can take a thumb or a fist and put it into that front left shoulder to get her to move back.
Okay. Nobody asked this one, but I want to make sure you clarify it. What is the show side? Which side of the animal is that show side?
The show side is almost always the opposite side of where you're standing on. So it's almost always the right. And that's when we emphasize that you try to do as much in a clockwise manner, and judges will always have you come in a clockwise manner because they want to see that long side where there's no obstructions to that animal. And so there was, I think I'd seen a comment in the chat group about not moving feet on cows. And really, you don't need to move them on cows either unless you're the outside exhibitor. So as Kurt's question comes up is that the show side is always going to be the one closest to the judge, and that's almost always going to be the right side of the animal. The only exception to that is that if you are in a side-by-side profile and you're on the left side or the first one that pulled in the line, then it would be the opposite.
Okay. An exhibitor asked, do heifers have to be in milk?
Well, no, heifers are actually animals that have not freshened yet. And so cows, they don't need to be in milk either. In many shows, there's a dry cow class, and that's where no matter what the age of that animal is, unless it's an unfreshened 2-year-old, they're going to go into a dry cow class if they're not actually in milk production.
Okay. And I think we've already answered this one, Rick, but once again, do we switch the rear feet on the cow based on where the judge is?
You know, I would say yes. When they're in line, we don't see as much, but it is acceptable to move feet on the cows, depending upon where the judge is, but heifers, you don't. I would say that, you know, in many cases, I'll probably give a personal opinion on this one. If your animal is set and she really looks good and you don't have to move her feet, don't move them. You know, I guess if she's in the middle of a line of a bunch of cows, it probably isn't that important to do that, to move those feet back and forth. He's not going to be able to see the fore and rear udder attachments anyways. And so you can probably set them up square on those back feet as long as they're comfortable underneath of her and it doesn't affect her, weakening her top line. You can set her up square and be sufficient with that. And then I wouldn't move them at all.
Okay. Somebody typed in the chat box, and I'm not sure I got it recorded quite right, but I thought you do not touch the rear legs. That was the comment.
You won't touch the rear legs. And a clarification, can you use your feet to step or to set the legs? There's one thing that I would say that kind of if you can synchronize your feet as you're moving backwards to where when your left leg goes backward, her front left leg is coming forward, and it kind of looks like synchronized swimming out there. Everything is, it just flows. I like that. When you get into line and you want to stop your animal, you can actually take your left foot and go toe up. And so when you're walking into line really slow, you can put your foot up and that heifer can tap your foot, and then she knows to put her foot down right there. In the guidelines, it says if you're going to use that method, do it discreetly. But that's a front left foot only where you can bring your foot up. You'll never use your back feet or use your feet to set the back feet of an animal at any age. You don't get a show stick. You're going to set those feet with the halter or by pushing into the front shoulder of that dairy animal.
Okay. Here's a good one for you, Rick. Hopefully you're ready. How much should my dairy cow weigh for what I'm showing in the animal division or the showmanship division?
I like it to not be classified as weight. I like it to be where you have an animal that you look like this is the best size for the size of you as the exhibitor. You know, we saw a really cool picture in here. This probably looked like a 10-year-old kid that maybe about 5 feet tall, showing this monster cow in showmanship. I would say that might be a little bit too much animal for him. If you're a young person, and I've seen a lot of young people on this webinar, is that if you're 10, 11, 12 years of age or younger, I really like you to be showing younger calves. Something that it looks like you're about the same size as far as maturity as what the animal is. Does the weight matter? Usually weight is associated with flesh, and flesh you don't want to see on dairy animals. So a fleshy calf probably means that you are way too nice in feeding that animal way more than you should be feeding them. So it might take away from your showmanship a little bit if we're focusing our attention on weight. Okay,
and I've got one more question. This is a heads up for Brian and the rest of the crew on the back on the scenes catching questions. Do dairy cattle shows, do they have a cow-calf pair class? Can I show the calf with the cow at the same time?
No, what they will do is they're going to go with pedigrees at times where you can show like a, a dam. Well, actually, it's a dam daughter class. There's there's a few shows that do that where it's same pedigrees. Yeah, I would say it's rare, but there are a few shows that have them.
Okay,
Tough
Rick, I got a,
question.
whoops.
Go ahead.
Rick, I got a couple more questions here for you. First one is, individual is asking, where can I find educational items that can use for future workshops in our area? Is there one main good resource that you would recommend?
For dairy showmanship.
Yep. Or
I
for
would
dairy overall, I guess.
For dairy overall, actually, one of the things that I do like as far as a resource is the Holstein Foundation has got a really nice publication that goes through a lot of the stuff that we talked about tonight. I think Horde's Dairy is a really good publication to subscribe to from an article standpoint, and they do focus a lot of attention on the showing and basically selection of quality dairy cattle. I like those two publications probably as much as anything. Now, breed associations have all got really good print material, but the Holstein Foundation is probably the one that's got the most information on proper methods of showing and prepping animals for exhibition.
Okay. Individual writes, why does too much fly spray hurt the animal?
It's not so much that too much fly spray will hurt the animal. It's the fact that it has, sometimes it'll have products in there that will dry the skin, and that can cause some problems. It actually makes the hair sticky, and then it dries, and it can cause some flaking or basically drying out of that hide.
Okay. This individual writes, he is going to be showing a brown Swiss this year, and he has a black halter. Does he need to buy or purchase a brown one?
Nope. I would say if you got a black one, you should show a black one with pride. No, what they want to make sure as far as the halter type, it's not the color. It's if you get too wide of a nose band where it looks like it's a beef halter, some dairy judges will maybe frown a little bit upon that, but the color should be irrelevant. You know, and I guess brown Swiss or jerseys, I've seen almost all of them that I've seen are black, no matter what the breed of the dairy animal is.
Okay. I believe I have one question left for you, and unless someone else types in another question, but this should wrap up questions for the night. Individual, we're going back to leading into the show ring and wants to make sure that she is understanding correctly. When you enter the ring yourself, or you yourself walk forward until the last person is in, then you turn around and walk backward, right?
That is correct. Yes, that is the correct method that and then basically everybody turns and walks backward at the same time. And it slows the pace down. Usually we want the animals to get in to the show ring at a fairly comfortable pace. And then once everybody is in, then everybody turns, walks backward, and the pace slows down quite a bit. I mean, you're kind of going at, I don't want to maybe sound too negative, but turtle speed. You're going slow, and it kind of emphasizes the structure and the ability of that animal to move. And so it's pretty important that we do that. I would say 10 years ago, before we got into this moving forward, it could take a half hour to walk around the show ring one time. And it just got too drug out and too long. And so I think the changes that have been made of when the judge decides to pull you into line, everybody leads forward, you pull into line, and then you go back to showing in a backwards position, and it just speeds the show up. And so I think they're very positive changes that have been made.
Okay, Rick, we just had one more pop in. What happens if you're the only one in the ring? Do you walk backwards as soon as you enter the ring?
The answer would be yes. They've said, over the years that if you are under close inspection, that you walk backwards. Let's say that you made it into a round robin, or like in your question, Brian, is that you're the only one in the show ring. You're always under close inspection, and so you would walk backwards throughout that. If it's a round robin and if you have a 3-minute station with the dairy animal, yeah, I'd walk backwards the whole time.
Okay.
Those are some really good questions, and thank you, Kurt. Oh,
Leanne, I had one comment here that I wanted Rick to it's a personal comment, and I believe Brian will agree with me. Showmanship begins at home. Showmanship takes lots and lots and lots of practice at home with whether it's a dairy animal or all the way down to maybe our smallest animals, which will be coming up next week, is the rabbits. We need to practice. Would you agree, Rick, with that?
Absolutely. I can't overemphasize your comment, Kurt, and that is, you start probably 3 months at least prior to a show. And basically, when you get into the show ring, I think it's also good to take your animals out in the show ring before the show, if at all possible, to get them familiar with the surroundings. But if you have built that bond or that relationship with your animal, they know what you're thinking. And if you can go out there being calm and relaxed, they should cooperate, and the show should go off without a hitch. But if you're gonna drag an animal out of a pen of 50 calves 2 weeks prior to the show, you're probably not gonna have the best show day.
Had one question pop up here. Rick or anyone else know of any virtual dairy shows coming up in the near future?
I don't. I just visited with a gal yesterday, and I guess in North Dakota we had a cancellation of our state fair, but they're very hopeful that World Dairy Expo is going to go on. I would say that I take a lot of pride in teaching dairy judging to individuals, and to do the Hordes Dairy Judging Contest. Now that's a paper judging event. I think that's something that you can do to learn. As far as a virtual show, I have not seen anything in particular. Maybe Leanne or some of you other guys on here, gals, can know of something else, but I have not seen one at this point.
I haven't seen any with some of the virtual platforms that are currently out there. Most of them are beef cattle, but that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. And so you could certainly contact them and see what options are out there, because I certainly have not personally looked into specifically dairy shows. So start doing some research and just Google virtual dairy cattle show, and you actually might see something pop up.
One of the comments Leanne and I were discussing earlier is that, the big thing about dairy cattle is if you go back to feet, loin, judge, and that is to know what a good animal looks like. And I'm a believer that if you want to maximize your dairy experience, whether it's through showing or basically learning, get involved in judging. I think that the Hordes Dairy program that's out there, as well as some other judging programs, if you've got and I've seen a couple of clubs on here that have got dairy clubs, I guess I would strongly encourage you to kind of expand your horizons a little bit. I think knowing more about what a good animal looks like will also help you in becoming a more competitive exhibitor as well. And again, I see the comment down here is practice, practice, practice. And I can't say that that I wouldn't be 100% behind that comment. Is that practice makes you a more well-rounded individual, whether it's from the showing, the production, or just the support of a program.
Yeah, that's so good, Rick. And, I just kind of echo that. And your success is going to be very dependent on how much you practice. And so if your cow gets scared, being patient, and most times something in the environment might have scared them. And so at home, I practice with my horses. I blare my music. I create an environment that could potentially be pretty scary, because if it's the first time you've ever been to a show, one, you got to load your animal. So now you got to practice getting in and out of the trailer. But two, it's a whole new environment. And so that's really scary for that animal. And so creating an opportunity where your animal can be subjected or introduced to different things is really key. So you can show up that day on show day, load up nice and calm in the trailer because you've practiced it, so your animal's not stressed out as bad. And then you get to the show and your animal is like, hey, I got this, because you've been working really hard, practicing at least 3 to 4 times a week with your animal, leading it. Kind of in that video, you saw one of those ladies, or a couple of them, really struggling. Their animal was getting pushy, wasn't really paying attention to them. And so that comes with practice at home, leading them all the time. And just like what Rick was talking about, practice, 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 getting those animals really used to you and spending time with them.
Well, I know I've thoroughly enjoyed the questions, and I think that you guys are off to a great start. The one thing that we talked about earlier is that we do have a showmanship booklet that's going to be coming out later on this summer, and you want something in a hard copy, by all means take a look at that. As well as Leanne mentioned, that this is recorded, and I think that it's going to help you become a more competitive and successful individual or family as you get into your dairy showing experiences. And I'm really happy to see that we got such a young group out there, and I hope that we can keep this dairy industry moving forward and have you guys as our mentors. So thanks for participating, and we appreciate your support in making this program successful.
Thank you guys for joining us. We are so glad to have you on the call tonight. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening.